Is this offense better? Let's talk about what the quarterbacks have shown so far through spring practice, and if the Badgers have our Badger fans have reasons to be a little optimistic this year for football. Let's go.
You are Locked On Badgers, your daily podcast on the Wisconsin Badgers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Badgers, your team every single day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Appreciate everybody being here. I'm your host, Ryan Harings, and we are talking football today. We are talking spring football, quarterbacks, offensive updates, players to watch for. Is the hype on Jayden Ballard legit? Plus a bunch of your questions. We got the great Donnie Slusher from Badger Blitz joining us. He's been there, boots on the ground, eyes on the team. Donnie, not your first time on the show, but first time we've talked football in a while. I want to start here. Does the offense look better? Does it look more fluid? Does it look more Wisconsin-like?
How you doing? Yes, Ryan. Overall, I would say the early optimism. I'm kind of waiting myself to gush and be overly optimistic. But overall, it does look more Wisconsin. It does look more back to the basics. The way I would describe the offense so far is that it is more complex and creative, but in a way that I think will ultimately make things easier for the players. There's a greater variety of formations, plays. They do more things. It's very pro style. Like that wasn't all just talk. With Grimes saying it's more of a pro style. We see more pro style concepts, like especially in comparison to Longo, who's more air raid. And the thing about Longo is that there was less creativity because I feel like he depended more on the players to kind of make their own plays. Like you'll hear sometimes coaches talk about or players like, oh, this coach schemes these guys open, or that wasn't really Longo. It was kind of go out there, make the play on your own. But I never thought that Wisconsin's weapons, were kind of good enough for that style of offense. So now we're seeing a little bit more creativity on the part of the coaches that should benefit the players. We're seeing more screens, wide receiver and running back, tight end screens. We're seeing more, quarterback running. We're seeing more, like behind the, like under center handoffs. And so the players, they'll have to learn more. They probably have to spend more time in the team meeting rooms. But I think it'll ultimately be to their benefit.
Somewhere, by the way, you mentioned more under center handoffs, more tight end screens. Somewhere Paul Christ is just, let's go. He's just smiling ear to ear. Let's talk about the linchpin of that offense too. Billy Edwards Jr. coming in, obviously Carter Smith, the freshman quarterback, and obviously you have the Daniel Neal as well coming in, compete for that second spot. First question here. This was from somebody in the Discord. There's not a quarterback competition, right? Billy Edwards is the guy.
Billy Edwards is the guy. I think Fickle and or Grimes have even said wording like, yeah, like we have a good starting quarterback and Billy. Like there's been last season that was a big deal. I think for the worst, but yeah, there's no sort of it's clear. It's concrete. We all know.
Do you think there's potentially a competition for two between O'Neal and Carter Smith?
I will say I was going to get to this, but I mean O'Neal, he looks good, but I was trying to in preparation for this, I was trying to go back through my head. It's been a little bit since the last practice, about a week now since the last practice, and we've only seen three. But I was trying to think of like the big memorable plays or drives from Danny O'Neal, and I was kind of coming up blank. But Carter Smith, on the other hand, he's had some worse days and some worse moments, but he's also had some great throws and really memorable moments. So it's going to take longer, especially at a position like quarterback, which is so like it's not like wide receiver where you can just like make some plays and kind of and like boost yourself up regardless of what you do the rest of the time. Like quarterback, it is about consistency. It is about being good day in and day out. So early on, I think Carter Smith is like that's a solid like question or an argument because it is possible, but it's a little early for to make conclusions, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And listen, it's a little early, obviously, to make any broad conclusions, but
Yeah.
but we're going to do it anyway. One of the questions I asked before practice, like, what is the thing Badger fans are most likely to overreact to in spring practice? And most people said the quarterback play, one complete pass down the middle to Jayden Ballard, and we're going to lose our mind. Back to Edwards, what are comparing him to maybe a Locke or even a Mordecai or a Van Dyke when you're able to see them? Where is he maybe better? What has he impressed you with so far? Again, very early in spring.
I would say so far he's not as physically talented as Mordecai or Van Dyke. he didn't enter college like as big of a recruit. He doesn't have like the natural talents. But I mean, he's a veteran, he's a leader. He's out there and you always feel confident, like he hasn't done he's had a few like strong moments, like where they really let him let it loose and throw deep. But it's mostly been, like leading an offense. Whereas I feel like last year in spring, when we saw the quarterback competition, the practices felt a little bit more like passing game exhibitions. You know what I mean? It felt more track meet-ish. It felt more like more deep routes, and then we got to the games. It didn't feel as it didn't translate as well. So I would say the practice, like what we've seen in practice, maybe doesn't look as flashy or impressive as what we've seen the past few years. But Edwards, overall, I mean, he seems like the right guy for the job.
And we hit on Carter Smith a little bit, but I want to take another step there. Obviously, we watched practice last year, and you see a Mabry Mettoyer come in, and it felt like, because I was at some of those too, it felt like he had a ways to go. Clearly, like he just a little deer in headlights type of thing. You can see some physical tools. It seems like Carter has made a more immediate impact just in terms of making an impression or turning some eyeballs, right? Which still, he has a long ways to go. He's a true freshman. Would that be an accurate statement, though, that he looks like maybe he's ahead of where Mabry was last year?
Yes, yeah. I was going to get to that at some point, but Mabry, like the talent was there, like he had an arm, but like the distance between like what we saw in practice to like, oh, we could really see this in a game. There was a lot of distance, and it doesn't feel quite that way with Carter Smith, and part of that is the offense that they play in. Like I said earlier, Longo is kind of more like, all right, go make some plays, like make some big passes, and the Grimes has kind of made things easier for Carter Smith. But Carter Smith, like for instance, the last practice that we saw, I believe it was last Tuesday at the time of recording this, and there was a stretch of practice where he made a few throws that he probably had like a 30-minute stretch of practice that was better than any stretch of practice I ever saw from Mabry. Like he doesn't just have the arm strength and the kind of like raw athleticism. He's a more polished passer. He seems like he's been trained better. Like various quarterback coaches. So last year like we're kind of Braden Locke. He was struggling near the end of the year, and there was a big question of like why can't they even throw in Mabry just to see what would happen? And I think at the very least, Carter Smith seems more playable, I would say.
Is there a sense of, I know you've been able to talk to some coaches after practice. We haven't got all of them yet, but is there a sense from the coaches? This is a hard question to answer, but do they feel like this team is further along than they were maybe last year? Do they feel better about the cohesion in the coaching staff?
I think so. When we talked to Fickle, he made a big point of talking about how they spent more time in the meeting rooms, in the film rooms. Like they spent more time on the mental aspect of it. Like about like learning the systems rather than just like kind of working out or just going on the field and trying things. Um, so and yes, I feel like there's more confidence and it's translating to what we see. Things definitely look sharper. But I mean, when we talked to Fickle after the first practice, he seemed very weary to be, like positive or effusive about anything, because I mean there was a lot of optimism last year, and even like on the part of the reporters, like there was a little bit more like, all right, now that the first season, we've got the first season over with. Now things should get easier. But we enter this practice session with a little bit more like, all right, dude, prove it to us. So I think there's a little bit more you know hesitance to be effusive with their praise.
Yeah, I feel that too. Especially you talk about last year's more optimism, but year one too, the way they came out, there's a bit of a media blitz of the launch and we're changing this. And listen, I got hyped up in it. I don't even want to go back. I should probably go back and delete my Tanner Mordecai prediction video. I should do that now before somebody looks that back up. So yeah, I get it. I agree with you there. We're going to take a quick second. We're going to go back and talk to Donnie about, did the Badgers hit gold in the recruiting portal with a certain receiver? That's coming up next on Locked On Badgers. But first, a quick second for our friends of the show over at Monarch Money. And listen, Monarch Money is great for me because this probably shouldn't shock anybody that really knows me. I'm not exactly the like X's and O's down to the spreadsheet of every Excel financial document, knowing where every single dollar goes. Like Monarch Money helps me with that. It helps me say like, hey, Ryan, you spent $1,000 at McDonald's last month. You should probably stop that. I'm like, thanks, Monarch Money. I probably should. That's what Monarch Money is here for me. It like helps me find that hidden money that I spend in places I should not spend. And so I can control it. So I can take control of my finances. It's like a personal CFO. And it's convenient. And it puts everything in one spot. You can partner up with your significant other or whoever to make financial goals. You're tracking all of your accounts. You're working together. It is really, really helpful and really, really awesome for your financial peace of mind, your financial security. It is great. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKDOWNCollege for 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com. That's half off your first year. Code LOCKDOWNCollege for half off your first year. Okay, let's jump back into this with Donnie. And Donnie, I always want to start here, man. All the great work you do, you're grinding over there. Where can people find what you're doing and what your site's doing?
Badgerblitz.com is where you can find my articles, all of our articles. It's me and Cam Wilhorn. He's a newer writer with us. He's been doing the videos with me after practice. He's been writing about every practice. He's great. Um, but yeah, and also Twitter. At Donnie Slusher _ It's a place to find me. Those are the two spots that I spend most of my time.
I want to talk about transfer portal guys that have caught your eye. And the one that if people are just monitoring Twitter, Badger fans are seeing the little highlight clips that go out. You see this receiver from Ohio State, Jayden Ballard. And we knew about him coming in, runs a 4.4, big guy, maybe even a little faster than that. Then you see him catching a couple deep bombs, and you're like, did the light go on? Did the Badgers find a gem here for their boundary spot that they've been looking for? What have your thoughts on Jayden Ballard been?
Just simple gut check. Watching the guy, he looks really good. He's a burner. He's a really good route runner. He looks polished and super athletic, which you don't see a lot on the Badgers roster currently. And like everything we've seen in practice, like it, if he was like a second year guy, or if he was like if we knew less about him, if he was younger, I feel like there would be more optimism. But he has such a weird history that I feel like a lot of fans and and like spectators, myself included, there's a little bit of a hesitance, that we're coming up against, to be excited because he spent 4 years at Ohio State, and I think I wrote down he had 11 catches, I think, in his career, and the majority of them came like 3 years ago, and like that's strange. And you hear that, and you think how could he possibly have an impact? But you remember that he played at Ohio State, and pretty much any other receiver room in the country, like that would be a way bigger red flag. But that's a team that they always have first round talent. They're always gonna, I mean, and they're the kind of school that's gonna play their best guys. Like they're not gonna like just play the older guys just cause. So and also the fact that Ohio State, like a program like Ohio State, kept him around for so long, I think is a good sign, because they could have easily told him a couple years ago, like when like hey, you're probably not going to see chances here, like might as well. But I mean, they kept him around, and so that gives me optimism. But the biggest thing that we've seen from him in practice, thing that stood out the most for me is, besides the play, it's just been the attitude. He's talking trash. I mean, he's pissed Rico Holman off multiple times. I mean, if Rico was a bigger guy, he probably would have just beat him up, by now. But and he brings an energy that honestly this offense needs, and like that has a he's a real. They needed an aggressor. They needed someone who would come in with confidence and moxie, and kind of and pump the guys up. The offense needed somebody like that. Things were getting a little bit dreary last season.
Yeah, it's really interesting because you mentioned 11 catches in 4 years. I'm just like, man, he's fresh. He's got fresh wheels. Then he's got a ton of tread on those tires. But the Ohio State thing, it works in both ways. Like, absolutely, your point is correct. They always have multiple first round picks. That's a hard depth chart to crack. However, that this dude has every physical skill you could ever look for, right? And it's still, at some point, as an upperclassman with those physical skills, you would have expected him to crack somehow that rotation. They play several receivers. It's not like a one receiver set. So it is super odd. But I also want to kick this back to you. I like, sometimes pressure is a great thing. And you have 1 year left of college football, Jayden Ballard. And maybe it's that pressure that flips a light switch inside of him. And I don't know, maybe we're seeing that for the Badgers.
I mean, and that's another thing. Like they brought in guys, I feel like the past 2 years, who, like, it was like really good recruits who had kind of underperformed for like a year or two, and then they came in almost there's almost like kind of like an expectation of like, all right, like this is the time. But for someone like Ballard, like he has to perform in this year, or else that's it. It's last season of eligibility. And I think that is helping light a fire under him. That'll hopefully light a fire underneath the rest of the receiver room and the offense.
Yeah, and you could picture an offense here where Ballard on one side, Koziel at tight end, Vinny Anthony, another burner on the other side, right? And I'm trying to keep myself from getting too optimistic, Donnie. This is what I'm telling you. I'm going to overact to spring things and maybe Tretch in the slot. Tell me that doesn't feel like, go back the last 10 years of Badgers football, one of the better collection of receiving talents that you would have, potentially?
On paper, and that's been the big phrase of the early, Fickle era, just on paper, the
Right.
potential. But I think the biggest thing. I don't know when you want to talk about Koziel, but I think I think he can be the true difference maker in the offense. He can be the guy that that truly, because I feel like the passing game worked a lot better 2 years ago when they had Will Pauling, who was kind of the only guy who could consistently get open. And I mean that was easy just for like Tanner Mordecai had like a safety valve. He had someone he could go to consistently, and like Pauling was still on the team last year, but it wasn't the same Pauling. And the fact that there just wasn't a single guy who could really get open and draw attention away from everybody else, that really had an effect on the receiver room as a whole. So
Let's get into Koziel right now then, because I think outside of Edwards, who as a quarterback is always going to draw the lion's share of the attention in a portal class, I feel like most people would say Edwards was the big get, the star get, or one of them. What does he look like early?
talking about Koziel.
Yeah, Koziel.
Yeah, like, I mean, the quarterback position is naturally gonna draw the most eyes and opinions and headlines, but I really think that Koziel is almost as important of an addition, or he'll be almost as important to the offense, just because of what I said is that the offense there was just no weapon who could consistently get open and consistently be a safety valve for Braden Locke. Like Braden Locke, he wasn't good last year, but like point me to all the open receivers that he was missing. Point me to the receivers who, these like the great receivers that, that were underperforming. And I think that just having one guy like that, just having one guy who can get open and, like catch pretty much anything that's thrown to him, I think it'll have a massive effect on the offense. I mean, past few years, I've gotten the vibe from watching the games that defenses playing the Badger offense, they just have way too easy of a time. Like there's no stress, there's no sort of like oh crap, like we better guard that guy. I think Koziel can add some stress because he's the kind of guy that can either get open or can safely be thrown to, when he's covered.
Yeah, that's really well said. Let's hit some other portal guys quick. Anybody else know? So Charles Perkins on the defense front seven has generated some buzz. Anyone else from that portal class early that you would point to and say, he looks like he really belongs here? That's maybe a really nice get for the Badgers. And again, we all recognize very early still, but
I would say Koziel's the big one. I would say Deani Hill, the cornerback. He's the transfer from Miami, I believe. And in the cornerback room, that is another one where, it's like they brought in the two starters back, and then they got in a couple of transfers, and I feel like there was a little like there was an exhale from the fan base, but like I don't know if it was totally enough, or if that room will be fine, because last season that room, cornerback is often a room for many fan bases that is stressful. You know what I mean? Because like you can do everything like well on defense, but if like a corner can just leave a guy open, and the play goes to shit. But cornerback, Deani Hill, I mean, he's the kind of guy like adding another body, adding just the third guy to round out the starters. I think that will have a massive impact. But as for the defensive linemen, something I want to talk about where a lot of guys, like I wrote down some names of guys who have been impressive and who have popped off the field, but it's so hard to judge because of the depth on the offensive line. Like I think the starting offensive line group is really good, but it gets very shaky after that. So we'll see guys. I remember the last practice that we saw last week, Tyrese Fearbury. He had a stretch of like 10 plays where he probably got like 3 sacks and like a couple more pressures, and he had a great stretch, and he was playing against the second team, and he played against the first team and he wasn't as impactful. So that's the biggest thing to watch for, like when you see stuff about, like a defensive lineman that had a great practice, like read a little bit extra. Like is he up against the first team O line or the second team O line? So that's the biggest thing with the defensive lineman. A few names that have looked great, like Fearbury. I think Patrick Peterson has looked really good. But it's another one where I'm still hesitant. Still hesitant.
Quick question on this, then I want to get in some listener questions of people that submitted. They knew the great Donnie was coming on, so they flooded my inbox with questions. It feels like this is the third year in a row where we've been worried about offensive line depth. And I know the coaching staff has taken steps to address that. 5 recruits last year, 5 recruits this year. Is this, again, like a year where we kind of have to be on pins and needles? Like, man, I hope you don't lose a tackle. I hope you don't lose a guard.
Um, Ultimately, I think they can withstand 1 or 2 injuries, like a couple injuries. They haven't they have a few strong backup pieces. Um, I mean, well, first off, it's kinda hard to say who the backup pieces are 'cause the starting right guard position has been a little
Mm,
chaotic. First day, it was Ben Shaw, then it was Kerry Kadenko, and then third day, it was, Emerson Mandel. So, and those are 3 guys who are all, like, sort of starter level. They could be plugged in and, you would feel somewhat safe. So there are a few guys, especially last year's class. Like I thought those tackles, starting off with Kevin Haywood and Emerson Mandel. I thought that looks like a pretty good group so far. But it's another one where I think they would be fine on the interior, especially on the interior if they lost a guy or two. But if I would only start to really worry if they had some sort of year from hell on the offensive line.
okay. I mean, that's not bad. And every team, to some degree, can't withstand too many. Like, there's not a lot of teams that can withstand 2 or 3
Yeah.
injuries along the offensive line anyway. So that's actually pretty good to hear. We're gonna take a quick break for Friends so come back and talk a little bit about who is the star on this defense, if there is one. We're gonna come back next with Donnie Slusher on that one. But first, a quick second for our friends of the show. As always, a quick second to say thank you for listening to Locked On Badgers. Today's episode brought to you by the all-new Nissan Armada Pro 4X. Nissan is incredible. We get to work with them every March. Right now, Nissan's all about stats because numbers do not lie. And when it comes to that all new Nissan Armada Pro 4X, the numbers are on an MVP level. They can tow 8,500 pounds, which can quite literally carry the whole team or Wisconsin Badgers offensive line, plus the gear, wherever you need to go. It is powered by the twin turbo V6 engine, delivering the strength and performance to handle highways, back roads, and everything in between. And with room for up to 8 people, the Armada Pro 4X can go out and for all your big crews, big adventures, even bigger memories, whether you're exploring off-road trails or rolling up to the arena, the Armada Pro 4X brings power, versatility, and style wherever you go. Take your adventures to new heights in the all-new Nissan Armada Pro 4X. Learn more at nissanusa.com. Okay, let's jump back into this. First question for Donnie. This is from Badger Pack Sports. This is not from Badger Pack Sports. I want this one here from Shadowless Hand. I apologize. Are there any unmovable objects or dynamic playmakers on defense?
Um, Early on, it's been there's varying levels of confidence in each position group, I'd say. I mean, if you want to say like, unmovable objects is different than playmakers, I feel like, because
Mhm.
like there's like the cornerstone guy, like someone like Daryl Peterson, for example. Like he's gonna start, he's gonna play a lot. I don't know, like I kind of wanted some more, plays out of him over the past couple years, but he is a guy that the coaches trust. He can do multiple things. I feel pretty confident that he'll at least start up front. But other than that, immovable objects, the 2 starting cornerbacks I talked about earlier, Forkurine and Hallman, those guys seem set. The one I'll keep my eye out for is the inside linebackers. I feel like Christian Allegro and Taka Curtis, those are 2 guys who they've been last year they were caught in, kind of behind, 2 older guys who seemed like, they would make a greater impact, but they just didn't. And so I think if I were to guess, or if I were to, to guess and predict some sort of defensive playmaker or breakout guy, I think I would guess one of the inside linebackers. Those are real athletes. Those are guys for this system. And I'm kind of just waiting for one of them to, to put in enough reps to really see something.
Let me ask this because Tackett comes out a couple years ago, one of the top 70, 80, 90 players in the country, blue chip guy. Everybody wanted him, went to USC, came to Wisconsin. People were really excited, but it felt like it's been a year and a half, 2 year recovery from injuries and bad systems and scheme. And is this a great buy low guy? Is it ready to finally click for him?
I think so. I think last year, I mean, again, they were kind of, like they brought in, they still had Jake Chaney, who was still a holdover from Christ, and you had Jaheim Thomas, had who was originally recruited to Cincinnati with Fickle, as a freshman. So those are two guys that they didn't play, their impact didn't match their expectations, but they were also really hard to just kind of like be like, all right, not good enough, let's throw in the second year guys. Like, and that's another thing that I think fans kind of lose track of in their minds is that it's not just about who's the biggest playmaker or who's even necessarily like better on that day. Like even though like it maybe should, like there's locker room dynamics that go into it. There's like veteran like leadership dynamics that go into it. And maybe that's been an issue of the past few teams, but I think that Taka Curtis is a guy, especially who, I mean, like if there's any stock for him, like I would still buy Taka Curtis stock. Like I think that kind of athlete is a guy that does not roll into Madison often, and is I'm not ready to give up on him yet.
Yeah, I would agree with you, by the way. I think I would also not give up on him. I've long felt that since for a year or so that the portal era we lived in speeds up our expectations of players, where this is still a relatively young player without a ton of reps. And a lot of people have already like, nah, we're done. Go find someone else in the portal. I'm like, 5 years ago, you would be so excited to watch this guy develop still. And I feel like we've lost track of that a little bit. Several questions on running backs. Essentially, how are they doing? This from Badger 78. And also from Brett, where does it look like Yak is in the rotation?
The thing with the running backs, I would say there's a clear top three. There's two second years. There's Darion Dupree and Dylan Jones, and then I'd say Yak is the other guy. I'd say that's the top three. But as for the order of the top three, I really cannot tell you. Like I'd say going into camp, I'd say Darion Dupree probably like he got the first crack at all the first team reps, but I mean it didn't they didn't enter camp thinking like with any sort of showing any sort of clear hierarchy. So I really feel like it is a free for all for those guys. I think Yak, he's he's the strongest and he's the most physically developed of those top three guys. And I think in this kind of more hard nosed like pro style running system, I do expect him to play more this year than he has in the past years. But again, it's like me and Ryan were talking before, before recording. Like he's just a guy that he played really well last year. He was like the only running back who consistently was like, wow, who's that guy? And but then, Fickle basically called him a system running back and, kind of kept him in the doghouse to an extent. And I mean, hopefully the hope is that Jeff Grimes will come in here and say like why weren't you guys using that guy more? And like
Like every
and
fan said.
yeah, and he's the guy that I mean, if there's any more stock left for him, I think all the Badger fans have bought it last year, early last year, but he's a guy I haven't quit yet.
I have a crazy theory on guys that average 8.3 yards per carry. You just keep giving it to them until they don't average 8.3 yards per carry. That might be insane. That's where I'm at with Cade. I stopped talking about it last year because eventually there's just nothing you can say that wasn't going to change. But
Yeah. I mean, it's like Longo had like a Twitter hater like view of him. It's like, oh, I don't care, don't see it.
yeah,
That's it. It's like it's not how coaches usually operate.
it was frustrating to say the least. Question here, and this is hard to say, but there certainly even hasn't really been a lot of hitting, but Brian Shetty, is the size in the trenches standing out? A lot has been made about this team is bigger. We're more physical. We have more size. Has it looked like that stood out a little bit?
I would say so. Yeah. I mean, at least, especially in the defensive tackle room, like last year, the defensive tackle room, it was, like Ben Barton, Elijah Hills, and they were even relying on like Dylan Johnson, who was a freshman, and you know, like honestly just looked like a normal guy, even though he was still big. But this year, like that's the thing I was watching out first before, like you even saw like who was, like who was penetrating, who was standing out. It was, do they look bigger? And they definitely do. Like even really weird note, but the last practice that we saw, it was, three like those three big boys in the defensive line, two bigger edge rushers, Daryl Peterson and I think Fearbury or someone else. And then they had Thomas Heiberger, who's an edge rusher, just like roaming around like the middle, like in the box, like almost as if he was like an inside linebacker. I don't know if that's gonna translate to the season. I don't know if they're gonna implement that, but it is just like another sign that like they just want big guys up front and to hopefully cause some sort of ruckus. Because I mean that is the big thing that this defense needs, just some chaos and some difference makers.
Couple less quick questions. I again want to be definitely gracious and respectful of your time, but defensively, we had a couple other questions just on scheme. Have you been able to pick up on anything they want to do? Again, Badger Pack Sports, what scheme do they seem to be running consistently?
I would say I'd say they're leaning more on size up front. There's more, three defensive tackle, formations. But this is another one where I am trying not to read too much into strategies early on. Because remember last year, like they had a very aggressive style, very, like they would blitz guys all the time. Like that was something I talked about a lot in my articles and leading up to the season. Then we got to the season and they just kind of stopped. They just like weren't aggressive, like they tucked their tail in between their legs. And so like I am wary of, like, pointing stuff and saying like, oh, that's different. But I would say the fact that I'd say things seem less aggressive, and that's probably a good sign. Like they don't feel like they're not trying to. I feel like if they just like trained as if they were like gonna just rush all the time and blitz all the time, then they didn't do that. I would be a little bit frustrated if I saw another year of that. So, but yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like if you feel better about your front seven, you don't need to be quite as aggressive to scheme up pressure. That's a point I made last year. A lot of people were very frustrated with Tressel, and I think, listen, I think there's criticism warranted there for sure. But I also said it's tough if you have to scheme up pressure against every single opponent. Like if you have to find schemes to get pressure against Minnesota because your guys aren't winning one-on-one, that's just not an easy place to be a DC at that point. So I think there's a balance there. Last question here, we'll get you out. Then Badger Thays asks, any redshirt freshmen standing out? He lists a couple. Tommy Heiberger, who you mentioned, he calls him Tommy Turbo. Willer, Agard, Steck, KBJ. Again, there's others that are on this team as well. Any redshirt freshmen standing out?
Yes, I would say KBJ is a big one. Now he moves to that second slot position after Tretch, where Tretch was last year. He's made a lot of big plays in practice. He's an incredible athlete. Thomas Heiberger, he's been playing more. And that's another thing about defensive line. They added so many new guys that the rotations are weird. Like one day you'll see a guy playing a bunch of first team, and then the next day you won't really see him at all. But Thomas Heiberger, he has managed to be a more consistent piece of that front four. Emilio Agard, he is another guy that stood out to me so far, and amongst the cornerbacks, like there's a lot of natural anxiety about the future of that room and the depth and the age. And Agard has been one guy where I'm like, you know, it's easier to to breathe a sigh of relief after seeing Agard because he stood out. But the biggest thing is that like it's really tough to say because like do they look good versus will they play? Is the big question, especially in positions like receiver or even offensive line. But I would say KBJ has been the big standout. And also Emerson Mandel. He's the guy that last year they were putting him in. He was true freshman last year, and they were putting him in as like at second team tackle. Like often having to go up against linemen who are years older than him, and he looked pretty good. And they put him at starting right guard this past week, and he looked good again.
Yeah, he's a guy with a lot of physical upside for sure. He is the great Donnie Slusher. Go check him out on Twitter. Badger Blitz, a great spot for all sorts of Badger football and basketball news. Go check that stuff out. Thank you for tuning in. As always, really do appreciate you guys on Wisconsin. When you're done here, go check out the Locked On College Basketball Show. All your March Madness news is over there on Wisconsin, and we will talk later.